Okay, I think it has just hit 4 o'clock here in Oxford in the UK, where I find myself today. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us for this Trinity College London Transformative Teachers webinar. As always, I can see in the chat box as we were waiting for the webinar to start that we have a truly international group of peers joining us today from all sorts of countries, including Kazakhstan, Taiwan, the USA, Paraguay, Switzerland, Italy, and many, many others, including Spain, where our speaker for today is going to be joining us from as well. Just before I hand over to our speaker, a little reminder for those that have been here before, or just some housekeeping for those that are here for the first time. We're going to be here today for about 1 hour. Our speaker will be speaking for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes. So there will be time at the end set aside for you to ask your questions. This is being recorded, as you know, so if you have to drop out at any point, don't worry. It's being recorded. It will be both on the website in due course, and we will email you a link to this recording sometime within the next week or so. Do play around with the view so it's the most comfortable on your device. And this will be an interactive session, so please make sure you continue using the chat box as you already have been. But you'll see there are quite a few of us here today, so as usual, if you have any burning questions and you don't want them to get lost in the flow of the chat, use the Q&A or the question button you can see, and we'll make sure to try and ask as many of those in those final 10 minutes. And finally, the all-important record of your attendance. We will be sending this to you automatically after this webinar within a week or so as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speaker. Short introduction here. So as I said before, Andréia is a teacher trainer based in Barcelona, and she started her career as a teacher in Sao Paulo in Brazil and has since worked as a teacher educator. She's DIPTESOL course director at Oxford TEFL, for example, in Barcelona. And she's also a materials writer and an assessor. So like many of us here, wearing many hats in the TESOL TEFL world. And she's here today to talk to us about ideas to promote genuine communication in the language classroom. So time for me to hand over.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for the very nice introduction. And hello, everybody. My name is Andréia. I am in Barcelona, Spain, as Simon said. And first of all, I'd like to thank Trinity for the opportunity to be here talking about a topic that I like so much, which is ways to encourage more natural and genuine communication among students. As Simon mentioned, this is an interactive webinar. So I know everybody's already has already typed and said hello in the chat. I just want to make sure that you can still do that while I'm sharing my screen. So can I see some hellos in the chat just to make sure that you can participate, because I will ask many questions. Okay, that's good. It's very nice to see some, well, not see familiar faces, but see some familiar names there in the chat. Thank you very much for coming. So today's webinar is about tasks and promoting authentic and genuine communication in the classroom. And many people associate the word task with task-based learning. We will also talk a little bit about task-based learning, but just to explain the structure of this webinar, we will talk a little bit about a definition for tasks first, the nature of tasks, how some people define tasks, and then later we will see some examples that I took from my own teaching and some ideas that I stole from lessons that I observed about how to make tasks from a course book a little bit more genuine and more motivating to our students. So I will start with a brief introduction. I'm afraid that Simon spoiled a little bit. I am in Barcelona, but I am originally from this place. And Simon said that it is Brazil. But can anybody guess the city? Let's see if there are any guesses from what the city might be in Brazil. Can you type them in the chat? Let's see. That's very good. Somebody already guessed, and I can't believe somebody got the name of my city right. It's not Rio. It is similar to Rio because it's got a beach as well. So the name of the city is Santos. I think Medalit guessed correctly. It's a city by the beach. It's not very large for Brazilian standards. There's about 500,000 people living there, which is medium size for Brazil. And does anybody know what Santos is famous for? It's famous for for things that are famous all around the world. Can anybody guess? All good guesses. Coffee, yes. Football, yes. Havaianas, okay. Maybe, but they're not made there. Sea sports, everybody's is close. So yes, famous for football. Also famous for something that I just thought might be amusing to show, which is these buildings here. If you notice something wrong with them, it's because they're all leaning to the side. So Santos is very famous for its leaning buildings and the seafront. And many people mentioned sports, and nobody mentioned the sports that I'm thinking about. It is famous for football. You're absolutely right. Neymar, Pelé, these very famous football players are from Santos, but it's also very famous for beach volleyball. Yeah, Georgia's right. Beach volleyball. This is not a picture from Santos. I stole this from another event, but this one is. It's quite famous for beach volleyball, and this is something that I do in my free time. I play beach volleyball, and you cannot see it. I'll show now, but because I play beach volleyball, I am very prone to injuries. So I am currently injured now. This actually happened last week. And because the webinar is about tasks, we're going to start with a task because I kind of need help. I have a bad injury. I cannot play volleyball for the next, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 weeks. And I'll give you a task. Could you please type in the chat some ideas or advice to help me stay active? Because I play volleyball almost every day. This is all I do as for sports. So can you please type in some ideas things that I can do with my injured hand? And do you have any advice to help me avoid injuries in the future? Nordic walking, eh? You should go for regular walks. Okay, what else? Running, not really a big fan of running. Andrea, that's a very, very good idea. Is to strengthen my wrist. So maybe do some exercise to strengthen my wrist. Okay, have you thought about wearing a wrist guard? Okay, yeah, I'll have to start doing that now. Nordic walking, not a good idea. Thank you very much. These are all very nice ideas. I wanted to start with a task like this because this is something that would happen in real life, isn't it? If I arrive in class, which did happen last week, I arrived in class like this. My students, they wanted to ask, what happened? How did you get hurt? And give me some advice because it's something that really concerns me, not being able to stay active because I am injured. So they gave me a lot of advice, and I can see here from the chat that you are using a lot of different language to give me advice and to make suggestions. I can see a lot of imperatives. I can see some questions like football, because obviously we're not talking, right? You're writing. If you were talking, the language would probably be different. But I can see some full sentences here like, you should go for regular walks, jogging will help, you can try to do something, I recommend doing something. So some phrasal verbs, some fixed expressions. And coincidentally, on that week, well, not that coincidentally, but the same week that I got injured, I was going to do a course book unit with my students, because we all do that. And this was the task. I'll give you some time to take a look at the task that I had in the course book and how I coincidentally hurt myself on the week that we were going to be doing shouldn't, to give advice and talk about health. So if you take a look at this task, this is a very standard course book task where students fill in the gaps using should and shouldn't and some verbs. Then there's another activity here that says make sentences using the prompts. So something very prescriptive on how to use the modal verb, should and shouldn't, the target language. And another exercise here about health and lifestyle as well. And the prompt is make sentences using the prompts, add should and shouldn't. So things like, you should do exercise, you should turn off your mobile phone. Because I had this, I decided to change a little bit some of the tasks, because I thought that this was good for some practice, for automatizing the language. But in my opinion, this was a little bit more real, because I had a problem right in front of me. So my question to you, and again, I'd like you to type some answers in the chat if you can, is first question, what's the difference between the two tasks? The one that we did, where you gave me advice about my hand, and the one from the course book, where students have to write prompts. Do they have the same outcomes? Can you type in some answers, please? So I have some people here saying that the first one is more authentic. Okay, well, yes, it is a real problem. And in one of the tasks, the students are given prompts. The other one, the language, there's no language. It was really an open question. Okay. David saying the first task could be a real life situation where there's more than one way to express advice. Okay, I agree with that as well. So it seems like the consensus here is that one of the tasks, because it was less structured, might generate more language, might generate different structures to give advice or make suggestions, and it is closer to real life. Whereas the second one, the one from the course book, is more structured, maybe more appropriate for accuracy training or to drill a specific structure. Which I agree with all that. Now, I'm gonna ask, this is a silly question, but because in both tasks there is communication, but what do you think makes the task communicative? In one word, do you have a definition for what makes a task communicative or more authentic? Okay, so I see something that's relatable, personalized, relevant. Okay, that's a good one. If I'm interested in listening to it, that's very interesting, because here the outcome is quite predictable, isn't it? Whereas here there is a real gap there's somebody really looking for advice, and whatever the interlocutor is saying is important and relevant. Here, it's a little bit more mechanical and provided by the book. So I think that it would be interesting to show two different definitions of tasks, because although I agree one is more relevant, there's more context, they both serve two different purposes, and we're going to discuss why and the difference and when to use each of these different tasks. So these are definitions by David Noonan. He defines tasks in different ways. So the first one would be a real world or a target task. What is that? So let me show you some features or characteristics of what he calls a real world or target task. And like you mentioned there in the chat, a real world task is something that people do in everyday life outside the classroom. So it's something that people actually do when they're not studying English. And the focus of the task, the focus is the successful completion of the task and not using a predetermined language item. So when we did the first activity, when you gave me advice, there were no instructions about what type of language to use. You're free to give me advice the way you wanted. And although in writing, it would come differently from if we were speaking face-to-face, there were still a variety of language structures and linguistic items that you used to give me advice. And the last thing, and the most important thing, is that there is a clear communicative purpose. So the two people, the two interlocutors, they're trying to achieve something together, which is the purpose of communication. In this case, the two questions that I asked, how can I keep active, and are there any ideas to help me prevent this same injury in the future? So there's a clear outcome there that is communicative. In contrast to that, in contrast to the real world or target tasks, Noonan also defines pedagogical tasks. So let me show you some features here. So a pedagogical task is more similar to a classroom activity that's designed to facilitate practice of a language item, like the task that we saw before. It might simulate real-world situations, but there is more structure because the aim is to support language development. And learners should manipulate and produce language and use their grammatical knowledge to communicate meaning. So it's the other way around. Here, there is more focus on the type of language or lexical items or a speaking function being used, whereas here, the focus is on communication. Now, if you think about course books, and I'm pretty sure that most of you use or have used course books before, you will encounter many different types of pedagogical tasks. And here are some common examples. You see role plays where students have different roles. They are doing something real life, but in a very structured way. Another example of a pedagogical task is to order a dialogue, to give directions, for example, or any kind of dialogue. Questions and answers, where students are given a set of questions and they have to ask each other, and this may take the shape of many different kinds of classroom activities, like find someone who, for example, that's a famous one. And brainstorming, making predictions, personalizing a specific set of or language item. These are all pedagogical tasks because the main aim is to practice a specific skill or a specific language item. Real world tasks, I'm not listing them here because they can be anything. They're very, very broad. And throughout the session today, we are going to be taking a look at different real world tasks and how to choose them for teaching. So what we did today in the beginning of the lesson was real world. Like, I have a problem. Can you help me with a solution? So this is an example, but we will see others throughout the webinar. Now, if you think of language methodologies and approaches, if you think of the history of methods and approaches in language teaching, could you think of some that favor the use of real world, or what Noonan calls target tasks? Can you please type some ideas in the chat? Okay, so many mentions of a communicative approach and task-based learning, lots of mentions to task-based learning, PBL, project-based. Dogme. Okay, so I see there are a mix of approaches, methods, procedures, techniques, frameworks, but I am going to show you some approaches, and we will talk a little bit about them and see what they have in common. Because, like I mentioned before, many people, when they see the word task, they immediately associate with task-based learning, which is a very reasonable thing to do, because task-based learning does revolve around tasks, which can be target or pedagogical. But like many people mentioned, yes, communicative language teaching is where the whole thing started, where meaning became more important than form in many senses, at least in more recent teaching. So in communicative language teaching, the focus is on communicative competence, and language is used to express meaning. So if you think about something that's real life, you will always think about meaning first instead of form. And as mentioned here in the chat, the communicative language teaching is the umbrella for many different other approaches that came after it, or more or less at the same time, like task-based learning, which was mentioned by many people here. So of course there are different there are different spectrums of task-based learning, where sometimes very pure task-based learning really revolves around the completion of a task, and the task has to be real life, something very, very meaningful to the students. I also saw many mentions of content-based instruction and Clio. I don't think, oops, sorry. I don't think I saw any mentions to Clio content and language integrated learning, where a subject is taught alongside English and language comes after, and the focus is on the content, or like some people mentioned there, projects. And the last one here that I like to mention is participatory approaches. Is anybody familiar with this? It's not that related to language teaching, but I thought I should bring it, because I am Brazilian after all. So Anna says no. So participatory approach is the focus on the learner and their life experience. This came to light in Brazil through Paulo Freire, who is a scholar in education, and in a participatory approach, the learner's background and experience is taken into account when a syllabus is created. So this is not necessarily about language learning, because that's not what Paulo Freire did. He worked with more general education, but in participatory approaches, the learner's background is really taken into account. So yes, then is mentioned, yeah, Paulo Freire, exactly. So most of these approaches, they will take a more communicative stance to classroom activities. And I think that this table might be helpful just for us to briefly compare what people would call something that comes from a more traditional approach and how this translates into communicative approaches to language teaching and learning. So in a more traditional approach, the focus of learning is language as a structured system. How do you think this would translate into a communicative approach? So here, the focus would be on real-life communication. In a traditional approach, the type of language used tends to be formal, more bookish, and sometimes unnatural. So there is a set syllabus that doesn't really consider how language changes and how language actually happens in the world. And in a communicative approach, the focus is on genuine everyday language with attention to how it's used appropriately in context. In a more traditional approach, the syllabus tries to cover as many linguistic structures as possible. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with this because you've used course books, and sometimes you open the content page and there are lots and lots of structures to be covered in a very short time frame. But a communicative approach, the aim is to cover what the learner needs and sees as important. And finally, in a more traditional approach, language is presented in a linear manner, and the sequence is determined on linguistic grounds, whereas in a communicative approach, language stems from other grounds like emphasis on content, meaning, interest, and most importantly, what the student needs. Now, if we look at this, a traditional approach, it does fit a lot of, if we look at a course book, the contents fit a lot of what is defined here or what is described here, doesn't it? Because when somebody's writing a book, or for course book writers, this is important. It cannot be they're writing a book for a big and large audience. So there has to be some structure, there has to be a number of language items covered in a certain period of time. And because many teachers have to use course books when they teach, they sometimes end up falling into this because they are following a course book strictly, or because they are in a context where the students expect the book to be used the way it is. But the idea today is to look at some activities that are described in course books and try to bring them to the more communicative side, meaning to look at pedagogical tasks and make them a little bit more similar to real world or target tasks. I brought a quote here from Dave Willis that I think sums up very nicely the idea behind target tasks. I'll give you a minute or some seconds to read it. Of course, Dave Willis is talking from the perspective of task-based learning, but I think that this part here at the end is very important for us to keep in mind. Learning is prompted and refined by the need to communicate. So the idea is that the need to communicate is what will generate the opportunities to refine learning, correction, and also to really identify what it is that the student needs at that moment. So I'd like to share some practical ideas. And like I said in the beginning, these practical ideas come from my own experience as a teacher. And the last one is an idea that I stole from a trainee, from a lesson observation. And how many of you teach teenagers? Can I have a show of hands in the chat? How many of you work with teenagers or teach teenagers? Me. Mm. Okay, that's a lot of you. And how many of you have to use a course book when you teach teenagers? Katerina, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I think it's very unlikely to find, we're very likely to find some teachers here who teach teenagers without using a course book. And then, of course, you have different types of classes for teenagers. You have general English and some exam preparation. So Veronica doesn't use a book. Let's take a look. This is the book that I've used with my students. They're teens, 15 to 16. And does anybody recognize this book? Well, the name is here, Empower, Cambridge University Press, level B1. Anna, no life, Empower, this one, from Cambridge University Press. So these are very standard spreads of a course book. You have some vocabulary, a reading text, language comes from the reading text. There's a little bit more vocabulary and a speaking activity at the end. The topic of this unit is actually quite friendly to teenagers. It's about favorite books, favorite albums, favorite films. It's about culture in general. And the grammar that comes out of it is the passive voice. That's a very standard. This book was written by, it was published in XYZ number of copies were sold, etc., etc. So I wanted to do an experiment with my group of teens. So bear in mind that what I did with this group was experimental, and then we would look at some of the takeaways from what I did with the group. I have to use the book. The parents bought the book, and they need to do the activities, but I wanted to give it a twist based on what they said that they would prefer to do, given the exercises that we had to complete within a certain period of time. So this is one of the tasks, right? They had a reading activity. We had to study a little bit of the passive voice, and the task was this one: think of a book, what happens in the story, make notes about the characters, and take notes and talk about the book with a partner. That's it. So very standard, talk about the book, make some notes about the characters, the story, what happens. Now, what I did was I asked the students, and remember, these are teenagers. I asked them, when do people talk about these things in real life? So I want to throw this question at you. I don't think anybody here is 15 or 16. And for me, it's been a while since I was 15 or 16. What do you think they said? Can you type some ideas in the chat? Okay, when they're asked at school, that's a good reply. They never read a book. No, they do read books. They do read books. Maybe a TV show. Okay, so my students surprised me. I hope they surprise you too, because they said something that I would never come up with myself. So I asked them, when do people talk about these topics? And Simon is close. He said TikTok, and that's what my students said. They said, oh, there's a lot of booktubers that do that. And I went home and said, what is a booktuber? I don't know what that is. And then I found out that booktubing is the practice of creating YouTube videos focused on books, reviews, reading challenges, lists, book hauls. And then I became obsessed with this. I started looking at these different booktubers. I found lots of, these are not teenagers, of course, because teenagers usually don't share videos on YouTube, but these are young people who talk about books online. So what they do, they rank, they share reviews, they make like top 10 list, or they show how many books they bought this month, which is a little also there's a whole discussion of buying too many things to show online that came from that. But my students came up with this idea, and I decided to transform this task into a booktubing video. Now, of course, that with these students, we did not create the video. We rehearsed as if we were going to make the video, because filming students does involve a lot of bureaucracy from the school. Can they be on camera? But we did a pretend booktubing video. What was involved in this task? What did we do? We planned. So the students in groups decided what type of video they would make. Was it going to be like a fun video or serious video? They scripted the video. So who's going to be the speaker? What is the person going to say? Is everybody going to talk for a little while about the book that they liked? And they rehearsed, and we did not record with this group that I'm talking about. However, it is possible with time, and the students don't even have to be on camera. What they can do is, for example, show illustrations and speak over a presentation, for example. What was interesting about this task is that even though we did have the whole unit where they studied the passive voice and we did a lot of controlled practice on that, there were other things that came up that were linguistically more relevant than the passive voice. Was there a lot of passive voice? Yes. For example, millions of copies were sold. It was written by, it was written in, but also things like adjectives and adjective noun collocations to describe the characters, to describe the plot, to describe the locations. A lot of narrative tenses, and during the planning stage, a lot of functional language that they needed to use amongst themselves to negotiate, agree, disagree. So this was something that was their idea. As a teacher, I would not have thought about booktubing, because it was a concept that I was not very familiar with. And I thought it was a very, very good idea to ask them the question, because from this task, we did something that was a little bit more relevant to them and not as boring as just answering questions about a book, right? Like I said, we didn't make the video, but it is a possibility depending on how much time you have with your students. The second task that we did together, this was obviously on another day. We did a little bit of the same thing with this task. This task was a little broader. It was a speaking task where students had to talk about their favorite album, their favorite painting, the best book that they've ever read, a song I sometimes sing. So they had prompts that were related to the unit of work that we were studying. And I asked them the same question. When do people talk about this in real life? Any guesses? I think they're going to be similar to what you said before, but would you like to give it a try? So maybe during an interview, if they're famous. A lot of TikTok, introducing yourself, getting to know someone. These are very nice ideas. Dating, okay. So again, my students surprised me, and they came up with an idea that I would never think about. Is anybody familiar with Spotify Wrapped? Does anybody know what this is? So Spotify Wrapped, if you have Spotify, this is a music app, and at the end of every year, in November or December, they create an automatic, they generate automatic statistics about how much music you've listened to, your most played track, your most listened to artist, your most played playlist. And they came up with this idea because, okay, this was the end of the year, so I think it was on their mind. They were seeing a lot of people sharing their Spotify Wrapped on social media because it auto generates a video, and the students were sharing it, the ones who use Spotify. And this was our idea. We were going to create something Wrapped, not Spotify. They could choose to talk about a film, films in general, music, and sorry, I'm going to skip this video for time. And they had to create their Wrapped in the year. So what was their most listened song? Did they create any playlists? Did they watch videos? And they had to present that to the other students as in a Spotify Wrapped. Of course, that there are no designers there, so they did that orally. What was involved in the task was a little bit of brainstorming, so deciding what type of Wrapped they would do, music, films, books, or any other topic. They had to plan, take notes on the data, try to remember all the books that they've read, how many minutes of music they've listened to, and they had to share and report to their classmates. Like the other activity, this one generated more language than the one predefined by the course book. Again, a lot of passive voice, cannot really escape that, and also we had been studying that, and it was fine to use it. Again, lots of adjective and adjective noun collocations, lots of lexical groups to talk about art, and lots of speaking sub-skills like back channeling, showing interest, showing that you're listening. So this one was another idea that they had, that came from what they were doing in real life at that time of the year. Another one that I like to show you is based on this task. And this is an interesting one because this one caused a lot of controversy, even amongst my students. So they were doing a reading task and, sorry, a listening task. And the pre-listening task was to match the definitions and the book covers. Very course booky, something that we're all familiar with. So can anybody tell, let's do this activity together. Definition 1, which book is it? Is it book A, B, or C? Can you type in the chat, please? Okay, definition 2. What do you think? Is it book A, B, or C? Okay, that's B, and of course 3 is A, is the first book. So my students, they were not very happy with it because this caused some discussion on whether these book covers were good or not. And one student said, if you ask ChatGPT or some AI, the book cover is going to be so much better. And then an idea arose from that, which was, let's give it a try. Let's put these definitions on ChatGPT and see if they're better or not. So the task that came from this was to create book covers using AI and to discuss some of the implications of this, right? So first thing that we did for fun, what we just copied the exact definition that was in the course book, and we asked an image generator to create a book cover. Would you like to see it? Are you curious? So this is what came out of not ChatGPT. This was Andréia, which is a CapCut image generator. Are you happy with these images? What do you think? They're atrocious, aren't they? The title doesn't make sense. It's very funny here because the definition says his daughter must tell him before it's too late. So why is the daughter on the boat? Exactly, Dad. Why is the daughter on the boat? Makes no sense. And the students, obviously, they caught up on that. And then my teacher had was, okay, so let's make this better. Let's improve this prompt and make Andréia create a better book cover. And they did that. So that's the prompts that they one of the groups, right? The students were doing that in different groups. I will give you some time to read. And this is how they improved the prompt to Andréia, which is the tool that we were using. Do you think that the covers are going to be a little better? Are you curious? Let me show you. What do you think? Improvement? They're a bit better, and there's a funny one here. The daughter is still on the boat. This one, the daughter is drowning, which is horrible. But they had to choose one, and they were happy with the last one. They thought it was the least bad, right? From that, we did play around a little bit with other tools. They used Bing to create other book covers. Now we're gonna do the other way around. This is a famous book that I'm gonna show you. And first one to guess which book it is gets a prize. Which book is it? Katerina, you're very good. How did you guess this? So you're right, it's Harry Potter. As a teacher, I was not very happy with this prompt. So they had this very, very simple prompt, and they were also not happy. This is not a very nice book cover. We tried again. We discussed how to write a more structured, a more prescriptive prompt to AI. And these are the new covers that they got with a much better prompt, with some language mistakes that we addressed later, but much better than the previous one. So if you have to choose a book cover, this would be better. Of course, that we're playing around with artificial intelligence with 15 and 16-year-olds is something that I don't take very lightly. So what was involved in this task was some brainstorming. We talked about, they decided which books to describe and how these covers would be. But also a very important part of it was to assess and reflect on the use of AI in design and in the creation of art, and also how they are feeding the AI machine with their ideas. So we did discuss that. It was a limited discussion because this is a B1 group and they don't have enough language to talk about this at length, but it was something that was brought to their attention. And again, some of the language generated by the task was passive voice, adjective vocal locations, language, and a lot of speaking sub-skills as well. Very, very briefly, because I'm running out of time, and I did something similar with a group of adult learners who study business English. It's an IT company here in Barcelona, and the tasks that they had to do in the course book, or actually it was an activity from ESL Brains. It was to create sentences, comparative and superlative, describing a gadget, a technological gadget. And what we did was to really work on a project that they were working at the moment, instead of talking about a generic technological gadget. So with the adults, and especially in this context of business English, it is a little easier to bring that to real life, especially if they are already working on a project where they have to compare and contrast things. So just to wrap things up, when you think about transforming a pedagogical task into a target or a more real-world task. I have a checklist here to avoid tenor. Tenor is a term coined by Abbott, I don't mean in the 80s. That means teaching English for no obvious reason. So how do we avoid that? And here is a checklist. By carrying out a thorough and a specific needs analysis, you really have to understand why your students are using English. Are they using English for work? Are they using English to pass an exam? And what type of things do they do in English? So in my case with the teenagers, I thought that the best approach was to ask task by task. Because if you ask why they're there, they're going to say, because my parents want me to be here. So it was a nice approach to ask them by individual task. Another important thing is to think about differentiation and choice. Do all students need to do the same task, or can they be given different choices depending on their interest? Is the task challenging but achievable? Is there a chance for students to reflect on their performance and on the completion of the task? And is the task engaging? Does it provide variety to what is usually done in class? And of course that you have to think about time and how it fits in your syllabus, but sometimes a small twist is enough to make something that's very course booky to more relevant to what students do in real life. So these are some references that I think might be useful if you want to investigate more about genuine communication and authentic communication in the classroom. These slides, I think, they're going to be made available to you. And thank you very much. If you have questions or if you want to keep in touch, you can write to me on my email or contact me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I'll let you get your breath and catch your breath after that. That was really wonderful and full of ideas. As I was writing in the chat box there, it's very obvious your expertise, knowledge, and skill there really shining through. So thank you for sharing those things. And a couple of things that stood out for me, I really like the idea of using BookTube or BookTok as well, that kind of thing. You're right. I mean, not everybody reads, but it is a very engaging way because it's such that short video format is very popular with young people. We know that. And some young people do read. And so combining those things, I think, is a really marvelous idea. That's really wonderful. And I really like the idea of the year wrapped as well. I was thinking for some of my classes, I don't always see my students for a whole year, but it could be a semester wrapped or even a week wrapped, something like that. And bits of language that might come out, even as I'm talking about my own, would be things like, present perfect continuous would pop out. Lately I've been listening to a lot of, or I've been eating a lot of, would naturally come out. And I think that's sort of a much more natural use than just sort of squeezing the grammar. It's very authentic, as you pointed out. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. And I guess the first one I wanted to ask, at the very beginning of this presentation, you said that I've got lots of ideas, which you did, and you said some of which I've stolen from observations, which I think is great, because I think you have to be very honest about this. But a couple of questions. What are some other areas or places of inspiration? How can we get more of these fantastic ideas?
That's such a tricky question, because I think it depends a lot on the context in which the people are teaching. If you're a private teacher, this can be very lonely, and of course that you don't have a staff room where you exchange ideas. So I think that coming to webinars like this, or even interacting with teachers on social platforms like LinkedIn, even Facebook, there are lots of teachers groups where teachers exchange ideas. And I think this is a useful platform for teachers who work by themselves. Also maybe joining an EOT association. There are many local associations by country. And for example, IATEFL in the UK, TESOL Spain here. And well, teachers usually share articles in these associations, and these are ways to do that. My favorite way, because I observe classes because it's part of my job, but when I was full-time classroom teacher, we would have some peer observation initiatives, because you end up doing the same thing over and over again if you're teaching for a very long time. And sometimes observing somebody for 15, 20 minutes doesn't have to be that long. Will give you a new perspective of something that you've been doing for a while. And maybe observing somebody will give you a different idea that you can try to apply and then assess. Does it work? Is it something that is aligned with my belief in teaching? So these are some things that can be done. There are many lessons online as well that people can observe and steal ideas from.
Yes, I like the idea of, I'm going to use borrow rather than steal, but I like the idea of that. Yes, it's hard to have an original idea, although lots of the things, excuse me, that you pointed out today were very new to me and really wonderful. And I think what really stood out for me is that quite a lot of what you were talking about is using the kind of course materials that most of us have to use because parents buy the book or students buy the book or institutions sort of dictate that we have to use a book. But what you're really thinking about is adapting those materials for the students that are in the class in front of you. You know, we don't have to follow exactly what the book tells us to do in order to meet the same outcomes, which is kind of a lot like the Trinity College London Cert PT, where you're adapting and creating materials and then reflecting upon use. And a question related to that reflection. So at one point, you said that when you're teaching lower level students, so that you have some A2 materials and maybe B1 materials, and sort of then reflecting on the kind of language that they were using or that they needed to use. Do you think there is a role there for the learners' first languages, the L1, to be used to help them reflect on what they've been doing with the language? So not using the language, but thinking about what they've done with English.
Yes, yes, absolutely. If you're teaching a monolingual group, I think that's very, very possible, because it does give the student a sense of, if you're an A1 learner, sometimes you really want to speak in your own language, how you're feeling, and it gives some reassurance to the student. It does. I think the common phrase that people use, it helps reduce the affective filter. Instead of forcing somebody to express how they're learning in a second language, which is quite difficult. And I can relate to that experience as a learner of Spanish. I live in Spain. Spanish is not my first language. When I first moved here, I really wanted to, and I am a language teacher, but I really wanted to ask something in Portuguese to compare, but it was not a monolingual class. So that was a little bit of a challenge. But if you're teaching a monolingual group, I think that there is a role for use of L1, absolutely.
And I suppose when it comes to self-reflection, that we often do that in our L1 or in our, our first languages. If we've got more than one, we're sort of doing that in our head or in our notes anyway. So it's a nice role there. Another question that's coming here is about knowing where the boundary is between something that's truly communicative that you were expressing here and something that just comes out, as a language drill. Are some of these tasks that are communicative just language drills in disguise?
Yes, yes, and I think there is a place for language drills. And like I said, there are some people who really defend a very, very pure version of TBL, where language instruction comes after the completion of a task. But for many of us, this is not very feasible in everyday teaching. So giving a communicative twist at the end is something that will help motivation, but it doesn't mean that you cannot do the language drill or for example, find someone who is that really communicative. Well, you can claim that it is because people are talking, they're exchanging ideas. Is that really relevant, useful in real life? That depends on the student, that depends on what they need. It may be or maybe not.
And I suppose it depends in some ways on the response of the teacher or the follow-up of the teacher. If the teacher is, in that example, if they're just focusing on the present perfect and who used it and who didn't, then it really is a drill in disguise. But if the teacher is using all the rich emergent language which is coming, which would include present perfect, but would not be exclusive to that, then I guess it is more communicative and it's working with the real language and pushing the students beyond where they just are, I suppose.
Yeah, I think a good indication is that sometimes you're doing an exercise where there are lots of questions using a certain item of the target language. And for example, find someone who, oh, have you ever been to Japan? And the student say yes. And then say, oh, really? I don't know, it's just for the game. They say it's not true. So well, no, but you have to say, you really have to ask a real question and answer with something that's real. But sometimes I think this happens to every one of us. They should say, no, no, it's just to use the present perfect. I said,
Absolutely.
why are we doing this then?
Absolutely. We are just about on time there, but I hope that there are some other questions here about adaptation for different levels and groups. But I think you touched upon that a little bit in your ideas. But I think that the main idea that I've got from your wonderful ideas here are that they can be adapted to people of different levels. And actually, because you're not expecting a particular language or target language, whether it's grammatical or lexical, to come from the students, actually it works on all different levels and even mixed ability classes, because if that student is using that language, fantastic. If that student's using that language, fantastic. It's just about upgrading the language to all the different levels, not the same level, but pushing each student just a little bit, that sort of I+1.
Yeah, like I said, the task has to be achievable and provide a level of challenge. And I think that you hit the nail on the head there. It's the outcome that matters. So some students will achieve a little more, and you can push them to produce more, and for there to be some language uptake from these learners, while others will produce maybe a simpler language set, which is also fine, as long as the task itself is completed. And then it will come down to classroom management and to some differentiated instruction to help different students produce within their capabilities and to improve a little bit from the point where they are.
Of course, and of course, they might not just be working on the language side of things, it could be the skills side. So it might be the pronunciation, stress, pausing, intonation, if it's a speaking thing, or the structure of a text, if they're writing something that's quite short. So I think those are all things that we can work on as well. It's not just about language and grammatical knowledge, it's the development of the skills and the sub-skills as well. And the soft skills, like creativity. So that I really like the idea with the AI, that they were almost saying these books aren't good enough, AI could do a better job. And then they realized AI couldn't really do a better job unless the prompt was more creative, and then the AI could be creative. So I think that's marvelous. You demonstrated that well. I think that brings us to the end of today. So it leaves me to thank you once again for your excellent ideas, sharing all of your knowledge with us today, and those very practical ideas that we can make use of almost tomorrow, I feel, in some of my classes. And also to thank everyone for joining us today from all over the world. It's been really, really global. And thank you for being so active in the chat as well. That's been wonderful. A reminder that we don't have a Transformative Teachers webinar next month in August, but we will be back from September until the end of the year with some more fantastic Trinity College London Transformative Teachers webinars. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your mornings, afternoons, evenings, and days.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming.